Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So we're using this microphone not because there's so many people in here, but mainly because we have Zoom people too. So we want to make sure that we capture it. So my name is Brenda Anders. I work for the Center for Teaching and Learning, as well as the Office of Institutional Research and Assessment.
My name is Susan Saragan. I'm the assessment coordinator. Thank you everyone for joining us, both our live and online audience. Yes.
So if you see me looking or pointing, we have a little camera here set up. So that's the reason for that. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here so you can see. So the idea here is that we're talking about instructional design, right? So all the components that go into the overall aspect of instructional design. So to begin with, there's an overall three main aspects. I have to make sure it's okay, go to the next slide. So there's three main aspects of this. And if you can understand these three different components, then it'll be that much easier for you to properly organize the class. And when we say properly organize the class, again, the focus here is going to be on the students. And I'll cover that some more here in a second. So we have three different components, right? We have the student learning objectives, the assessment, and the pedagogies. So some of these terminologies might be a little bit different than you've heard in the past, but we'll go over each one of them. So it'll make sense when we go through it. The key part of this is that there's three components, but they're all important in order to properly align. So we have what's called instructional alignment. When you have one of these things that are off or improperly placed, then it tends to affect the overall course. So that's why we're going to talk about each one of these and see the importance of each one as well. So the first one here, the student learning objective. Sometimes you might have heard this acronym SLO and SLO, right? SLO stands for student learning objective. So the idea here is, what is the student going to specifically learn? Their skill, a process, what are they going to be able to do by the end of the class? So this is a key thing that the class is supposed to be able to teach them. So that's the SLO. Now, along with that though, you have to understand that this is nested. So it's within the overall course, which is within the overall program, within the degree. So I can't just, I'm teaching a course, oh, I want them to learn this and this. It has to be properly nested. So that's why we have curriculum design, right? We have it so that it helps them for the next course, for them to understand the overall program. So again, that's why it's important. You probably hear this from time to time, this nested aspect, the goals, not just of the class, but of the program. So that's an important thing to understand as well. Along with that, we have to understand, well, where do we get this SLO from? Where does it even come from? If you're lucky, you'll get it handed to you, right? It'll be like, oh, it's at the end of the syllabus. You'll see it right there. So you don't have too much work to do, but you still need to comprehend, well, why is this an SLO? Because you might disagree, right? If you're the instructor, you're like, why are they learning this? You need to understand, well, this is an important aspect because it's nested, because they're going to have another class that deals with this in order for them to get their degree. So again, components, it comes from the syllabus, curriculum, a committee that'll go through it, or it might be a brand new program. Hey, there's we had COVID-19, now you're teaching about COVID-20, let's say, and it's all new information. And you have to realize, okay, what are the key things that they need to know in order for this to fit with the overall program? So you're gonna have to do some analysis. So how do you do that? Well, there's different ways to do that, but one key way to do that is by utilizing Bloom's taxonomy, revised Bloom's taxonomy. What this will do is this will allow you to see different aspects, different levels of a cognitive domain. And when we say cognitive domain, we're talking about, again, the skills, their abilities. And again, it's different levels. Generally, it goes from easier to hardest, not necessarily, but from there you can see, okay, what type of thing am I going to have them learn and at what level? Because if I'm just trying to get them to remember components of something, that's going to be at a lower level. And that's going to be different than me trying to get them to create information. So we need to understand that. And that's going to come into play later on when we talk about how to teach the person as well. So again, Bloom's taxonomy needed in order to understand the SLO, in order to understand what the student needs by the end of the course. So from there, we move on to the next section, the next overall aspect, and I'll have you take over.
Okay, so as you've been introduced, the course design has it's a triangle and it's comprised of three main components. So the first component, student learning objectives, we've been introduced to, and the second one is already the assessment. As the definition goes, yeah, assessment is the acceptable evidence proving that learning occurred regarding the student learning objectives. Namely, learning assessment, by saying learning assessment, we mean that we are using methods in order to measure how well the learning has taken place, how well the students have acquired this or that particular piece of content against certain standards, okay? So when we have this information, we can already adjust our course if necessary. Well, today we're going to concentrate mainly on two types of assessments. They are formative and summative. I would like to ask our rich audience, have you ever used or heard of these types of assessment in your classrooms? Raise your hands if you have. Okay, nice. Well, some people are having hard time differentiating between these two, formative and summative. Was it easy for you to do it, or still there are some misconceptions about this? Just tell me. It's okay. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about each of these, starting from the formative assessment. Mostly, formative assessment is defined as the assessment for learning. It means that we want to assess what is happening in our course throughout the course, yeah, not just at the end of it. So when we assess, when we conduct different kinds of formative assessment methods, we get some information. And what do we do with that information? We use it in order to make informed decisions to adjust our course, okay? So if it's carried out throughout the process, maybe we figure out that there are certain aspects within our course that have not been very well addressed, or the students are having hard time understanding. So what do? We adjust the course in order for the students and the teacher, of course, to gain the maximum benefit out of it. Also, it might be that you say that this aspect is perfectly addressed, the students understand, have acquired greatly, so there is no need for a revision task or something like that. Formative assessment, if we have effective strategies, it serves lots of benefits. Research has shown multiple ones. I'm going to today talk about specifically two. I will mention the two of them, the benefits. So the first one is it helps to shape knowledge. As the students are really, by the way, yeah, formative assessment is low stakes mostly. They are not graded and no stress, no pressure. So if it's not graded and the students have no pressure on to compete with each other to get the maximum score, so they are kind of in the process of shaping the knowledge. And the second one of the benefits of formative assessment I wanted to mention is that it encourages the student to take ownership of their own learning. So they are like, okay, it's not graded, I can just learn. So probably the end goal is not just final marks, but it is to improve our learning experience. So I can do it with formative assessment means throughout the course, not just at the end. Another important aspect of formative assessment is that it's the building blocks, okay? So it's just leading to the summative assessment. We are encouraged as instructors to build our formative assessment means on the topics, on the concepts, on the types of assessments, which are then going to be tested in the summative tasks. So they have to lead to each other. One more thing about formative assessment I wanted to talk about is that it's, yeah, as I said, it's the building block leading to the summative assessment. It's the assessment for learning, like I said, and it's pretty important, and it helps instructors to make instructional decisions for the benefit of the course. So now let's go ahead to the summative assessment. Unlike formative assessment, yeah. Unlike formative assessments, summative assessments are usually conducted at the conclusion of the instructional unit or course, or it may be even at the end of the program. And the aim is to evaluate the student's proficiency, the acquisition of certain material. So when we combine these two instructional methods, we can achieve the maximum benefits. Summative tests, unlike formative ones, are usually graded. They are weighted components, and they can be final tests or projects or concept maps or stuff like that. As to the formative assessment means, like what kind of means we have for the formative assessment, it can go as as impromptu as just like stopping your class for a couple of minutes, asking each student to brainstorm 2 questions, for example, of the topic covered up until this point, and then pairing them up with other students and having them ask and answer those questions. So it's an easy technique, less stress for the instructor and the student. It's formative assessment and it's active learning. So lots of benefits, like I said. Again, by this, the instructor gets some perspectives on how well they have acquired the course or what needs to be changed or improved. Again, leading to the summative assessment. And when it is conducted already, we check the grades against standards. That is our student learning objectives or other benchmarks to see how well the material has been acquired by the students. This was the second of the triangle, and now we're going to learn about the third component. Let's go.
Okay, so the third component, right? Now we're moving into pedagogy. So pedagogy is what you're doing for the instruction. What are you doing in the classroom to get them to learn the content? Again, this is also often referred to as teaching and learning objectives. My background partially is in the military. We always call these practical learning objectives or practical activities, right? So what are we doing in the classroom? Well, the thing to really focus on to improve the overall engagement in the classroom, because remember, we're talking about engagement too, is to focus on student-centered teaching, right? Student-centered learning, student-centered teaching. The idea here is that the focus is primarily on the student and their learning, not on the actual teacher. So, of course, the teacher is extremely important, but all of our decisions are based off of what is the student going through? What is their learning experience? What are they thinking? How are they learning? So now that we have that, now we can actually engage the student in a proper way to maximize their capabilities of learning. So we have to decide what type of pedagogy are we going to use. So before we go into that, I have a couple of questions for you, right? And we also want to pose this question to the audience. So if the audience online, if you're watching, definitely be ready to respond here. So there's been several different surveys that have gone out to different students in different universities, asking them what would be the best type of class that you would like to have. What do you think the results are? And remember, all of you were students at one point. So think about the classes that you liked and what you thought made for the best class. Give me a response. What do you think? Well, what do you think the students said, or what would you have said as far as what makes the best class? Interactive, okay, great choice. What would you say? Okay, so voices heard, very good. Lilith? Fun. Okay, that's a gold star for the day. Fun is a very important component. What would you say? You haven't seen this one. Okay, knowledgeable teacher, that definitely helps. How about our online audience? Does anyone want to brave a response? What would you think would be what students said during, again, there's been several surveys talking about what students want specifically in a classroom. Yeah, you can use, yeah, whichever one we're monitoring. Sometimes online audience aren't as brave. Anybody? Okay. So I'm gonna give you the results here, right? These are what they actually said, what they actually came up with. So you see this makes sense, right? It says logical, interesting, engaging, you mentioned that one. Interactive, useful, inclusive, mentioned that one. Fun, mentioned that one. This is a big one right here, motivation. This actually encompasses a whole lot of things, and a key component of motivation is relevancy, right? Relevancy. But how do you accomplish these other things as far as being fun and being interactive and inclusive? Well, you have to think about, well, what's going on in that classroom? So one instructional technique that's used by a lot of people is where you come in and you're simply talking the whole time, right? The entire time is you giving out information. Now, there's reasons for that. Main reason is, well, I have a lot of instruction to give, so I want to maximize my time by giving them all that information. That's a technique. But that's not active learning, and that's not student-centered learning, because you're not applying any of these things and you're not fully thinking about how the student is learning. Because if all you want to do is give them information, then guess what? We have the technology now that you can just write it all up, put it in a PDF and give it to them. Or maybe create a video and give it to them. That way it's actually even better because now they can view it as many times as they want. They can watch it as fast or as slow as they want. They can rewatch it, right? So that would actually be better than just you lecturing in the classroom. But if you want to maximize the instruction within that classroom, and you want to hit these things, then you need to use a more advanced instructional technique because we're trying to maximize engagement because that's what we want. That's what students want. And that's what the research shows is going to be the most beneficial for students to actually be able to learn, not just learn, but to also be able to remember and to actually be able to apply in the future, okay? So active learning strategies is what we want. Why? Because that's going to equal, next slide, that's going to equal our overall engagement, right? Again, it's active learning. Active learning will equal our engagement. So, okay, we all understand that, active learning, but what is active learning? Give me an example. Okay, so let's move on to, I have a full listing here of some nice examples. We're going to go through a spectrum of examples from the least active to the most active. Nice full spectrum for us to understand. But you've all experienced active learning before because you know that a lecture is simply someone standing up here talking the whole time. But a non-lecture, more active learning would be where you actually have to do something besides just sitting there like a bump on a log, right? So the fact that I asked you a question before, that was active learning. The fact that I engaged you, at least in some way, that was active learning. So what we want to do is maximize that. And these are some examples of how you can maximize that. So let's start from the very bottom here, right? We have lecture, but then going up the next one, we'd have an engaging presentation or story. So I could really captivate you with a great story about something that happened that might pertain to this topic. And it would be captivating, and it'd be great. You might be able to remember the story, but it's not the same as you actually participating. So that isn't actually active learning. It's a better presentation, sure, but it's still not active learning. So we need to move up this spectrum, move up this ladder, right? So the next one here, a guest presenter. Wow, if I brought the health minister of Armenia to talk about COVID, and that's what you're covering, man, that would be really interesting. It'd be really logical, really powerful. I'd remember that, but you're still not actively learning because you're still just sitting there passively receiving the information. So we have to keep moving up. Follow along worksheet. Okay, now you're starting to do something sort of, but it's not quite there yet. Now a direct question, like the example, like what we did in here. Asking a direct question to somebody and having that person have to answer, not just have to answer, but the rest of the people thinking that they might have to answer as well. Well, now we're getting to a point of more active learning. So that's a direct question that's to a person. This is polling everyone, so now they're all having to answer. Now we're getting much more active, so we can keep going up a discussion. If I changed everything and started asking you more opinion-based questions where you have to respond and then I have to say, well, what did you think about that? Well, now we're getting this full discussion. Brains are fully activating, and that's more powerful. That's more active as well. But it doesn't stop there. We can still keep going, right? We have discussion in small groups. It's much more powerful when you have to talk in a smaller group as opposed to if this room were full of 40 people. Well, that's difficult to have a discussion. But if we break that up into groups of 5, groups of 4, much easier, and you get much more engagement. And remember, that's what we're after to maximize that engagement. Going on, think, pair, share. Well, that's a great one because now you're forcing everyone to think, right? That's how this technique works, unless you're not familiar with it. But I would pose a question, and I would say, everyone think about this question, and write down your answer. So you would write it down. Okay, now that everyone has had a chance to think about it, I want you to pair up just with the person right next to you and talk about each other's answers for the next few minutes, and then you're going to share what you thought. Okay, so again, that's maximum engagement because it's just those two. Again, if handled properly, that's a really powerful technique. Next one, peer review, peer evaluation. This can be very powerful as well because now I have to not just interact with the classroom, but I have to specifically talk about someone else's creation or someone else's work. Again, it has to be handled in the right way because nobody wants criticism, but we do need to learn how to properly give and receive constructive criticism. So that's a powerful tool as well, and you're learning a soft skill. Moving up from there, we got interviewing a real person. Again, more soft skills, the maximum engagement there because you're actually having to sort of lead everything. Same thing with case studies where the people are given information, they're working together to try and solve problems. This is highlighted because case studies are generally real world problems. So that makes it much more motivational, which is, as we identified before, is one of the key things that students want, right? They want more motivation. Project-based learning. This is a great one, often recommended as a powerful active learning technique because the students have to go through, they have to do research. They generally work in teams. And again, the engagement that goes on there, learning more soft skills as well. And then a key part of this is a presentation afterwards. So now they're basically teaching the rest of the class the content that they learned. So in teaching is a very powerful way of active learning as well. Going from there, we move up to student presentations. Again, an extension of that. Peer instruction, you could have them, that could be the big thing is that they have to actually fully instruct. Scenario role play. This is a big one. This is a big one. Again, it has to be done in the right way. You have to think about how they're going to take it, what level of realism you're going to use. But this has been shown to be super powerful because you get more of an emotional connection. If I have to play the role of someone in the field making these type of decisions and actually going through with that, I get more because I'm going through the process of playing out this role, I get an emotional connection. So again, that's much easier to remember, much easier to apply in the future as well. Going up some more, simulations, games, the more that you can incorporate that, the better, because they're actually practicing the real thing. Games are great as well because now you're actually having fun. Remember the fun component that got brought up multiple times. So there's different ways to implement games. And again, it's very powerful because it is an active learning technique. You see how high up we're now within the spectrum. Going up even further, we have things like having a lab or an internship where you're actually doing this. You're working with someone in the actual field. So again, that's very powerful. So the key things to see here, to understand, is that active learning to increase that engagement is a full spectrum. You don't have to do the very top, but what you want to do is move up as much as possible. So there's different ways to incorporate different things. Now you have to think about different aspects of this, right? Because if all I do is, oh yeah, I love role playing, and I use that in my class a lot. I can't just do role play. I can do role play to help them understand a concept, and then I can give them maybe a quiz or maybe an assignment dealing with, writing something out. It all depends on how, because I want to prepare them for the actual summative assessment towards the end. So again, you have to be thinking about that. You want to use all these different tools, different implementations to get them to understand the concept. Now, how do you choose which one of these to use? Well, that's based on several different things. And again, the way that this is put in here is actually based off of different aspects of the type of emotional connection you're trying to get, the level of reflection, type of feedback, the topic. Some topics lead themselves better to different things. Also, the amount of time it's going to take. You're going to have to think about that as well as you implement this. Next one. And again, it's all based off of that. Okay, so we put this all together in order to understand these three concepts, right? Where we go in and we understand that it's not just three different parts that we have to sort of check mark, but it's also that we have to understand that this is an alignment. They all work together. And what we used was backwards design. So we're thinking about what the students need to know by the end. Now, how we're going to do that. So let's work our way back. Well, I'm going to teach them in this way for this concept in order for them to have this SLO at the very end. So using the pedagogies, and then what type of assessment am I going to do? All the different formative throughout, and then a summative as well. Did I miss anything? Does anyone have questions or thoughts, ideas about these different things? Again, three different important parts for instructional design. Questions, thoughts? Ideas? Does this make sense? Yeah, the implementation? Yeah. Yeah, it's systematic but going back to that, the spectrum that can be systematic, but there's some art level to there, right? Thinking about, well, how can I get them to understand this concept, not just remembering it, but to actually be able to do it and apply it. So there's different ways to do that, different thoughts and possibilities. And again, some of this is trying out different things and then learning from it, getting feedback, improving it, trying different things as well.
And in the teaching and learning process, yeah, in the teaching and learning process, finally, the opportunities are endless. And just having classes with just one type of teaching technique, it's boring, both for the teacher, I'm telling it as a teacher, and as a student. So we always want this fun and all the components that you have all mentioned. And again, opportunities are endless. It just takes a little bit of research, or referring, if you are teaching with AUA, to Center for Teaching and Learning, because we are offering plenty of resources just to equip the instructors with more techniques. Yes.
Definitely. So if you want more information, follow us on Facebook. We also have a website we're developing, but we're always sending out more resources. So definitely connect that way. Okay, no more questions. That's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.